Hi, good afternoon. So I'm Miranda, and thank you for coming to this talk about a topic that doesn't seem that very sexy, but I'm hoping to get you excited about it as much as I am. So today I'm talking about the other writing for games. Some of you in the audience may be narrative designers or work with narrative designers, but it's not the only writing that we do around our games. We also have lots of other documentation hanging around. And writing that well, there's way less attention to that. So we do work a lot about the stories in our games, but the fact that we need to have really good writing methods to be able to do our work well in other areas is not often looked at. So who am I? I'm basically a senior learning designer working in serious games, so I do a bit of narrative design myself for serious games. And I love creative writing, but on the other hand, I also really love making documents shorter, more to the point, cutting words. It's kind of my happy place. And what I'm going to talk about today is how I use a method called information mapping for that. So I'm going to start with a little story, just to set the scene. So last year, my Facebook account was hacked. According to my brother, who just saw things happen, for a flash, there was actually some child porn on my wall, and it got closed down in like 13 seconds. Cue further, I spent weeks trying to get that sorted, but it's almost impossible to find decent documentation or people you can talk to, or how to do things on the Facebook site. I think they actually do that on purpose, but anyway. So it also means that I lost my WhatsApp account and my Instagram account, because they're all linked, and so Facebook's like, yeah, it's gone. But so what I mostly remembered from that is all these things. So you're kind of trailing through Reddit, through YouTube to try and solve it, because what you find as support is not clear, hard to find, it's a bit everywhere, contradicts itself, and quite often that's what users of games look at as well when they've lost accounts or there's something that they want to know, how to do things. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to kind of segue to the talk, is how to have really good support documentation. And it goes wider than just the gamer support. It's also a method that can help you write really good documentation internally to make sure that you collect your best practices, that new people can easily find things, that your support team, when there's new levels or whatever, can easily move that onto the people who do the online support, if you've got that. So for players, for community support, for game champions, for everyone. So what do we define as good? So good is information that's accessible. I can find what I need and I can use what I find. It's accurate, which means that it must be easy to update for the people who actually make it. So they can easily find where they need to change something. So they don't have to trail through a whole lot of things and try and change it. It's clear, obviously, and user-focused, like who reads this? Is it for the player? Is it for internal game designers? Is it for people who support the players? Who is it for? Is gonna define how you write. Obviously it needs to be comprehensive, everything needs to be there. It's adaptable. It can easily be, it's easily compatible with any technology you use, whether you have all your communication on Slack, whether you have an internal content management system, whether you have documents on SharePoint, whether there are things on a website. Actually, it needs to be technology agnostic, the way you write. Because otherwise, you can't standardize and scale. Unfortunately, what we often find is this: too much text, too long, it's unstructured, it's hard to find. A lot of people write it, and you've got different writing styles and inconsistent layouts because everybody has their own way of doing things. The language is difficult because you sometimes use internal language or internal information to kind of talk to your gamers and have no idea what you're talking about. And that's why it's also so hard to exchange it or reuse it. So what we look at today, so the company information mapping that I'm kind of affiliated with as a distributor, and so I'm an instructor for them, and I basically learned the methodology about a very long time ago in 2003, and have used it for whatever I'm making. So I'm looking at a big case study where we trained people to reorganize their player support for a multi-million audience. We're also going to look at why many knowledge projects fail and documentation projects and how we can help that. And at the method of information mapping, I'm going to give you 6 writing principles that hopefully you'll get really excited about, and next Monday you'll be at your job, because I'll assume that you're going to PAX and not work. That on Monday you're like to your managers, like, okay, let's do this, let's rewrite our stuff. So I'm going to work with a case study, but I got a bit of mix of examples from them and examples from other things that I try to make as game related as possible. I'm not allowed to name the client, but you're all very smart people who know the way around games, so you might guess. Anyway, so we're talking about a freemium mobile strategy games. They have loads of downloads, massive revenue. And so they're based in Scandinavia, but have 24/7 support teams worldwide. And it's those support teams that we mostly worked with. Basically, they've got knowledge managers who write all their help articles, who write internal FAQs, external FAQs, what they call articles in the hub. And then you've got your game champions, who are the team that's online 24/7 to provide support via email, via Discord, via whatever the player is using, or just the chat within the game. So game/games. So, but they also write some of the FAQs of the things that they come across a lot, and they also write Slack reports to each other. So all these people are writing, but none of them are writers. All of them are mostly kind of game experts, especially those game champions are really good players themselves, and they've kind of worked their way into sport. So there was a lack of standardization of those knowledge articles, the frequently asked questions, and also internal procedures on, for example, refunds to people, or hacked accounts, like my Facebook account. Like, how do you work with these people? What are the steps? What do we send them? How do we check whether it's really a hacked account or whether, they're fraudulent accounts? And the information that they had was very structured, but like overstructured. Structured information as such is good, but overstructured, because you're still talking to gamers, and quite a lot of the gamers of this company are quite young. So overstructured, wordy, also repetition, inconsistent terminology, and not working towards the audience, so not addressing your gamers appropriately. So when you embark on one of these knowledge and documentation projects and you say, we're going to do this better, it often fails. It becomes this big thing. Once you've actually convinced people that it's important, that it saves you time, it saves you money, it often gets embarked on as a one-time fix. It's like, let's set up this massive project, and there's a few people in charge. We're going to make sure that everything's well organized on whatever you're using, Google Docs, SharePoint, one of these, garbage bins of documents, basically. There's no training for people to kind of go on doing that. It's like this big one-time fix, and we've changed, we've brought in like naming conventions and things like that, but then it kind of like goes down. And the most important thing that's missing there is that there's actually no methodology, so no writing methodology. People don't get trained in continuing to write consistently good stuff and all look in the same direction when they are writing. So the best practice for any documentation project is bringing these things together. So you've got the people who write. Most of them are experts. Very, very seldom there's like a technical writing team. Very big companies might have that, like, Intel or something, but no, there's no one there. People write their own stuff about what they know best. And what you know best, you tend to kind of, waffle on. And then there's the technology, whatever you have, but without a method that works between that, you're never going to get there. So let's look at what information mapping tells us. So the information mapping method was invented a very long time ago, actually in the 70s, and was a professor from Harvard who basically came up with that method for technical documentation. And he took things from cognitive psychology, from instructional design, from behavioral psychology, anything about how people learn, things like that. And he came up with what he called the information mapping method to analyze, organize, and present all kinds of information in a structured and systematic way, so always the same. And there's 3 big things in that method. So one of the very, very important things that people struggle with in the beginning is that we move away from paragraphs. The idea of a paragraph is good for all kinds of other stuff, but not if you want to present clear documentation that people have to, where they have to find things easily and exactly find what they need and not more. So we call them blocks, and a block is a modular information unit. So I'll talk about that a bit more. Then there's 6 research-based principles, which I'm going to go through one by one. And then there's information types, which I'll only briefly touch on. Just to give you an idea, the whole course is 2 days, so it's all going to be quite fast. But those 6 research-based principles, what I'm going to give you is really going to help you to kind of get started already. So let's look at those. The first one is chunking. It's a word that we all know. You need to chunk information. You need to make sure that there's no information overload. But very few of us actually do that properly or really know what it means. It's like, how do you cut things in pieces? And so in information mapping, we look at a block, or chunking things in blocks, which are small manageable units that are easy to process and easy to use. So just about one topic, and a very small topic. You might look at it as even part of what you think a topic is. So I'm going to show you an example. I hope it's pretty legible. So I've kind of blocked off some names of things. So this is an explanation internally about the young player version of some of the games that they have. All the information is there. There's bullet points, there's notes. But if we look at it a bit critically, we see there's actually, if we chunk it, we're talking about 5 different things. There's the availability of the young player version. There's on how you create it. There's why there is a young player version. There's when do players convert from young player to the normal game. So even though all that information is there, if you're looking for something specific, for example, a player asking, like, when can I convert to the adult version of the game, you got to read this whole thing and find it. So what you want to do with chunking is break those all up, like really thinking, what is this about? What's all in this piece of information? And come up with something like this. So what do we, like, where is it available? When is it created? Why is it there? And when is that conversion? So that when I need that, I've got someone asking that question, when can I convert? You just go like, not read, but you scan, like, ooh, okay, here it is. This is what I need to know. So easy to find and also easy to use when you find it. I'll just go back to show you, like, everything's there. And you put. In information mapping, we use a lot of tables and a lot of small headings as well, which you will see. So when you've chunked everything, when you've kind of decided, like, okay, these are all my small blocks I'm going to work with for this particular topic, you're going to look at relevance, second principle. So relevance means that you put information, so the small blocks of the same topic together, but also that you put the most relevant information at the top and kind of weed out what you think is not relevant to the topic and the audience. So some things may be relevant to the topic, but not to your audience. So you make sure that it's all to the point, relevant information on top, cut words, my favorite thing, like nice to have, just throw them out, put them somewhere else for anyone that needs them, but definitely not in user support documentation. And avoiding repetition, because you'll be surprised when you start chunking how often you find repetition in your own work. Because you're writing something else and you think, oh yeah, I need to explain what that means. And, yeah. So I've got a small text, obviously they're not widgets, but something else. That's on the side of one of these games. So how do I get more widgets? Well, to get more widgets, all you need to do is to play the game, and you can get them everywhere. So you need some patience and a bit of luck, and it's a matter of time until you have more. And you think like, yeah, it's like all I want to know as a player is like, tell me how I can get them. And also that second paragraph is like, it's by design because we want to be fair. Like, yeah, that's all good. That's your internal thinking. But if I am a player, what do I need? What do I want to find? Where do I get this? And it's like, it's very nice that you want to be fair to me, but at this point in time, I really don't care. So this is basically cut that all out. To get more widgets, all you need to do is play the game because they're available from pretty much anywhere. That's all I want to know. So there's where you find them, in the boxes and in the shop, where I can buy them with gems. So you remove that whole rationale that's internal. It's like patience, luck, we want to be fair. That's not what I'm looking for. And it's the player's relevance. Also, if you see here, that was longer as well. Like the fact that gathering boxes is hard, I'm sure they found that out for themselves by now in the game. And that is why internally we have decided that when you open a box, there's a very big chance you get another widget. Again, that's not the player's rationale. They know the boxes are hard. All they want to know is this, like, okay, in every box there's a possibility of having a widget. And then when you've done that chunking and weeded out stuff that's irrelevant, I like to even go a bit further, but that's more of a plain language thing than an information mapping thing. Looking at the audience, things like they are obtainable. You can get them. It's slightly more easy for people to read. Every box you open has a chance of containing. I hate passives, so just like every box you open might contain a new widget. So that's that kind of next step after you've done chunking and relevance. You can also look all the way at the end at cutting language. And especially, again, look at your audience. These people don't want to read literary language. It's just, what do I need? Relevance is also really amazing for writing emails. When I train, it's one of the first things that I see, is people writing better emails and writing better Slack messages. Because you weed out the unnecessary, you start by avoiding repetition, even putting little titles in your emails. So this is just an email to a player who's suggested something new for the game. And as you see, it's quite long, bit of repetition. And then on the right-hand side, you see it's only mentioned once, and the information on the same subject has been put together according to the relevance principle. What belongs with what? So even in something that seems quite simple as an email, going through, chunking stuff, looking at your relevance, is that relevant for the person who's reading this? And that's an internal thing I see a lot. It's like if it goes to several people, would it be worth like making 3 versions maybe of the email, or putting little titles in, like for the finance manager this, for this person that, for this person this, so that you save people's time by wading through. And believe me, they'll also react faster to what you're asking them. So once you've done that chunking into blocks, units of information, the relevance, it's also really important to look at labeling. So what we call in information mapping, labeling is basically titles for things. My favorite comparison is this one. So many of, when we use titles or subtitles, we tend to be a little bit vague quite often. We love things like overview, introduction, general, note, things like that, which doesn't say, when it's a box, I don't know what's in it. And if you look at this, when you move and you put nothing on your boxes, then obviously you've got a big problem. If you only put places on there, like general titles, it's still a problem, because if I arrive in my new house and, we're still very unorganized, but we need our dishes, and we need cups, and all my boxes say kitchen, then you have to open them all to see where the cups are. While the example to the right, I know exactly, if I need a towel tonight, where it is. And the same goes for, user support documentation, your internal documentation. Make sure that people can just scan through and find what they need and don't have to wade their way through a lot of very useful information, but maybe at the moment not exactly what I am looking for. So I kind of return to that example from before. So if I want to know something about these young player versions, I can now easily find it and immediately answer my user about it, because I just have to scan, find. I don't have to read the whole thing about your young player versions. So we've had chunking into units of information. Yeah, forgive me, I'm a trainer, I repeat. Chunking, looking what's relevant for my audience, what belongs together in this topic, what's nice to have. We've moved that out, we put that somewhere else if we need it at all. And then we make sure that we label everything clearly so people can scan through and find it quite easily and exactly know what's in that piece that they're going to spend time on reading. Principle 4 is consistency. We all know that, right? Being consistent. Use the same vocabulary and terminology. Make sure your spelling's always the same. But what we often forget is that structure needs to be consistent as well. So if I am talking about something that's similar to something else, like, for example, a software procedure, like how do I do this? Then if you've got a next software procedure, just make sure you present that in the same way. So for this client, for example, they have different financial systems that they work with. Financial providers can be Google, can be Pandora, whatever. And sometimes there's refunds to be done. So if you look at that information, make sure that the way you present that for the people who have to do that support and do that thing all day, because you're talking about millions of players, so it's their job all day to look at these things, that those procedures are consistent in the way they're set up. It's like, do this first, then do these things, then do these things. And don't show one in a table and another in bulleted points and the next one in numbered points, because they need to recognize it as something they, that one day know what to do. And then obviously vocabulary and terminology, it seems evident, but we often err against that. And when we err against it, we sometimes confuse people. This is a good example about, the compromised account here. It's like not writing from, contacting us, writing from. It's like, it's a difference between contacting and writing. Then there's that negative of not writing from. So it would really help, and on top of a number of other things, to find a way to consistently talk about that. Same here, seems minor. My game crashes. And then they've got the, what you minimally need to play the game. And it's slightly different in the way it's presented for Android and iOS. As I say, it seems minor, but it gives you an example of how things can easily be changed as well if the prerequisites for these games change. And everything's presented in an easy way. Everybody in the company working on this uses these same conventions to work with, then it's easy to change as well. Because you don't have kind of different ways of presenting it that I can get hung up on when I'm trying to change it. So simply, instead of having a screen resolution of 800 by 480, or then starting with those numbers as a screen resolution, seems trivial, but in the bigger scheme of things in your documentation, if you've got that going on, especially if, for example, you're working with your graphic designers and it's, written in different ways in different documents, people can make mistakes and you lose time and you lose money. So you just make them the same. It's not a big job and it helps. Principle 5, integrated graphics. So when you make documentation and you use graphics in what you're explaining, screenshots for software, screenshots of the game to explain things to players, use them only to clarify and emphasize. Don't just put stuff in to make it prettier. Integrate them in the text. Put them as close as you can to where you are actually talking about them. And a very important one, and that's a really important information mapping principle, always precede them by a stem sentence. So don't put your introduction sentence after it somewhere else. Don't put an introduction sentence. Just have one always. And in information mapping, graphics are lots of things. So we look at numbered and bulleted lists as graphics. We look at tables as graphics, and obviously images and videos. So always precede them with a stem sentence. And I'm going to deviate from the client and look at something else that many of you know. Unity. Isn't their site awful? Really, it's like, I used to be a programmer, and one day I just, for myself, wanted to learn Unity. I just basically gave up reading that stuff. It's just impossible. So I just grabbed something from a page. This is about using assets. It's hard to read probably, but so you've got that diagram, which looks quite pretty, and then they explain the above diagram, shows the typical workflow when you work with assets, blah, blah, blah. So an information mapping would start by doing this to start with, It's you, otherwise, if you look at this, I look at this diagram first, and then I look at the caption, which basically explains kind of to me what I was trying to work out from this diagram in the first place. So we're giving people It's almost like the labeling. This diagram shows your typical workflow steps when you work with assets in Unity. That's what you're saying, that's what's there. So yeah, I really like to use the Unity manual as an example. So that's the integrated graphics. So make sure they're always really, if you use visuals in any way, they're really close or integrated with what you're talking about. You use that stem sentence. Don't put it somewhere else, like in the diagram above, because people are already past that and they've already tried to make that out. And then the final one is accessible detail, which basically brings all these things together. So you've chunked everything, you've got your relevance, you've labeled it, you made sure that your graphics are where they're supposed to be. And so you provide all the detail your readers need, but also make it easy to find and easy to skip. That's a really important one in this kind of documentation, is make sure that people can choose not to read things and not to miss it, because you've labeled it clearly. So I don't have to read this because it's not relevant to me. So don't put information there that might be useful for something else. So easy to skip, really important. Now, as I'm partially also a learning designer, my fellow learning designers hate that because they want people to read everything because they need to be trained. But it also depends how much experience you have when you have, for example, training material. If I already know this, I should be able to see that, like, oh, I know that. I can skip this because it's clearly signposted for me. So again, a nice little example from the Unity manual about cameras. Now, I personally don't even have an idea what those are, but this is not going to help me, right? It's a literary text. So basically, the words perspective and orthographic have been italicized, but they're like in the middle of this waffle about art and the human eye. And this is like, okay, all I want to know is, what does it mean? Again, my stem sentence is underneath what I've got here. So what you want to do is this. These screenshots show them in those views. They are modes of viewing. That's what they are, first thing. And then you explain perspective and you explain orthographic. So if I'm not interested in perspective, I can just skip right to orthographic. I haven't rewritten the literary stuff. I've just split it up for now. But just, you know, explaining that they're camera projections. I don't know, you wouldn't have seen that, but that's all the way at the end. Like, seriously, that's the most important thing. What are those things? What is orthographic and perspective? They're camera projections in Unity. And now we're going to explain what they both are. So it's really that chunking. In this case, we've got everything because accessible details is what we, in the end, want to go. We've chunked it. We've made sure that what belongs to what has been put together and is on the top. Like, what are these things? They're camera projections. That's relevant, put on the top. I've labeled things. I've integrated my graphic by making sure it's got a stem sentence so I know what I'm looking at. And I've presented the explanation about orthographic and perspective in a consistent way. So that's all these principles together to make sure that I have the accessible detail as a user that I need. Does that make sense? So those were the 6 principles. And it sounds like it's not rocket science at all. But what really helps, what I find really helps with having a method is that it all has a name. So that when, for example, you're working together on a document, you can give feedback that makes sense. Like, I would put it there because it's more relevant to that topic, like use the word relevance. It's like, I would chunk this into more people. This label does not completely make sense. And that's why It's really, really good to have a method within your organization or the team or whoever or even for yourself, to know what you are doing and all look in the same direction. And that when someone's talking about, the game design, someone else talking about the narrative design, another person is trying to explain how you've rendered something, that you all work in that same way, so that all your documentation within the organization is easy for people to use. The labeling, for example, is a really important one for things like naming conventions as well, and folders. So it's kind of on a micro level and also on a macro level. Again, the chunking of where does the documentation go, what is relevant, what goes with what, or templates for this go there, or templates for that go there. Labeling them nicely, having a really good naming convention, consistent, again, naming conventions. So it's all about also accessible detail on your document management system, content management system, website, online help systems, Slack, writing really good Slack messages as well that don't get lost, or knowing whether it's relevant to pin them or not is another thing. So what did it bring to our big client here? So we did customized workshops to teach the information mapping methodology to both the knowledge managers and the game champions in their own content management system that they use. So it's, totally technology agnostic, because it doesn't matter, it's just those principles. I use it for e-learning, I use it for, I'm currently working on a risk plant analysis guide for biosecurity New Zealand. So it's also information mapping, it's just the principles. Plain language techniques. And so obviously we have improved and quicker internal and external support, improved player experience because they get answers faster and more accurate, and less review time as well of the writing by the knowledge managers, because they know that the game champions are using the method as well. And the content that comes to them is consistently better than it used to be. Right, so I use it for a lot of things, writing Bibles, game design documents, and as I say, other things as well. Questions? Still got quite a bit of time. Thank you.
Is this on? It's on. Hi, thank you. My question is about links. So if you have a document that was like how to use a staircase, and you had previously been a bit waffly because you were introducing other stuff that wasn't relevant, and you decide to chop that, is it better practice to have a link at that point in the document, or to list them all as like related articles or other FAQs or at the end? Are there benefits of different ways of doing it?
Yeah, so you couldn't look at links as that accessible detail. So if you have been waffling on about those stairs in, it's not relevant for everyone, then you can link out to other documents. But again, labeling there is really important. It's like, if you want to subscribe, click here, no. Just know what people, again, what they are clicking on. Why am I going there? It's like, if you want to know how many steps the stairs are, that's the link. It's not, so they know.
Would you say it's better to sort of pepper those at the relevant point in the document, or to take them all out just for clarity and then put those sort of other things down the bottom?
Well, it depends how big your, it's always the answer if it depends.
Okay, fair.
But if there's not many, it's quite nice to pepper them through, but you also don't want to have people kind of fly away to something else when they're not done reading. So if you have something important, it's better to put them underneath, because otherwise they might be gone in the middle of your explanation. It's, I always like to think about text like this as real life. It really helps you think. So what are you doing? It's like, ooh, interesting. Whoops, I'm gone. You want to avoid that if you want them to read it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which author said it, but I think it was the quote, "Writing is hard, editing is easy." I'm wondering, on that note, do you tend to, when you're writing these sort of documents, do you tend to come up with the content in a bit of a stream of consciousness first and then reverse engineer the structure, or the other way around, you'll come up with the structure first and then force that as a mindset to write the content?
Yeah, so in information mapping, we work with something which we call a PK map, procedure knowledge, because quite often you're looking at what someone needs to do and then what they really, really need to know to be able to do that. And what we often tend to do, many of us, is start with that K. It's like, why do I need this? Especially, in this case, I want to have more widgets. What do I need to do, and what do I need to know to be able to do that? So I tend to start with that, the PK map. Yeah, and that helps you structure. But then for the plain language, and I tend to try not to worry about how I write first, and then go back and cut words. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You were talking about multinational companies, so I was wondering if you have any advice for people who are suddenly at that stage when their audience is expanding out to languages other than English, about how they might approach their documentation and whatnot to allow for that or allow for it to be translated.
Yeah, that's where the chunking really helps as well, because you're not asking, that whole waffle about perspective and that's, it's going to become another kind of literally bunch of French or whatever you're asking for. And if you have those little blocks, it's also quite easy depending on what you use. A lot of translation, I used to be a translator myself, use Excel, so that you actually have little blocks of text that you can easily translate. And then if you've got a good system set up, you can just suck in that second column if you possibly can. But it helps much more than having people kind of, translating waffle, and you can also be selective about, this audience does not need this, so they don't need to. Yeah, it's that whole chunking helps you do it.
All right, thank you very much.
Hi there, thank you for the talk. My question is sort of about when you have a lot of legacy documentation, or a lot of documentation that's been built up over the lifetime of again, it's been around for a while. How do you sort of, as someone who's comes to these documents to want to update them, maybe have that ideology of wanting to cut things down, improve them, make them more readable? Often a problem that I face is not knowing, is this waffle, or is this something I'm going to be really sad that I cut in about a month's time? And how do you sort of resolve that without having a lot of duplicate documents?
Yeah. That is a difficult one if the original writers are not around anymore. But you basically start, I tend to kind of start with a current state and a future state. And the way you want to organize is having a really good idea of what the overall process is. So that you've got, we call them buckets, process buckets. So you can actually decide in this document, there's this bunch of waffle that actually belongs in bucket 5. So I can safely, I'm not going to throw it away, but I can take it out of this document that belongs in bucket 1 because that's where people use it. And then I can put that other content in bucket 5. But, chances are big that there's another document that already contains that superfluous documentation from bucket 1. So that's where you then decide between those two documents, so, put them together, what's the information, and it becomes one. It tends to reduce to 30 to 40% with that tactics.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you go for it.
Hi. What are some of the ways you can gauge the success of a rewrite, if you like? Is it less duplicate questions asked on a community forum, or? Yeah,
so that people can find their information easily themselves. It's not only for games, you just think the Vodafone site where I want to ask something, or I want to return something that I've bought online. If they make that, if there's lots of waffle, you will call. It's gift is. I'm not going to read all this. So you tend to kind of jump on the chat, but if you can immediately kind of like click, okay, this is the way I need to return this. It's clear, because it's just a chunk piece of information that I've arrived at with clear labels, then I'm not going to call. So it saves time for the people in support.
But as someone providing the documentation, what kind of feedback can you get from, say, from the user base who isn't obligated to give you that feedback?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more in what you see in terms of time and frequency, rather than getting really, good user feedback, because you tend not to do that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it was really easy to find. Wouldn't that be nice? But yeah, you just will see it in the less calls, less chat about certain things that you've made better to find.
Yeah.
It's just looking at the metrics.
Thank you.
All right, I think it's almost time to finish. Thank you so much for coming to my rather boring talk.